and welcome to our seminar.
All right, thanks. Thanks for coming, everybody. And thanks, Robert, for inviting me. This seminar is really one of our best venues for public participation in my mind, so I've really appreciated it. So thanks for having it. So a little outline, I'm going to talk just a little bit about my research here at Tech. It is relevant to remediation, but Robert invited me to talk about whatever I wanted, so I wanted to talk about public participation. I want to go through and talk about the regulatory agencies and their mandates, participation from within the system, some of my experiences in that, and then go into some more unconventional engagement opportunities. And there's a lot of expertise in the room here, so I'm really hoping to leave some good time at the end to open it up for questions and conversation. So my research, a continuous flow process for recovery of metal contaminants from industrial wastewaters with magnetic nanocomposites. It's a mouthful, but it's been a really great project. It's a project funded by Moretti and the Montana University System. It's focused on recovering valuable metals from waste streams, especially mine-affected waters. And it was really built on the previous research of Dr. Downey here at Tech and Dr. Rosenberg over in Missoula at U of M. So in a nutshell, we take a tiny little particle, nanoscale particle with a magnetic core and a functional shell. We put those particles in with our metal-bearing solution. It comes through a pipeline configuration. Once the particles are all loaded, we grab them out with a magnet, and there's parallel magnets, so we can run this continuously, but we divert those particles where we strip off the metals. They go to, it's called an electrowinning circuit, where we reduce those to their metallic form. The particles are regenerated and go back up into the system again. So it's this continuous process that can remove metals from waters such as Berkeley Pit or any industrial process that has dilute metals in it. Here's just some visuals for you. Here's our little particles. They have a magnetite core that's magnetically susceptible, this silica shell that's functionalized to be able to target specific metals. We look at, the common ones, copper, zinc, manganese, but we also look at environmental bad actors, things like that. They run through these inline electromagnets. We're able to grab those particles out of the flow. It doesn't impede the flow, which is important, especially in these high volume systems. We run it in a number of different configurations, but this is one way we experiment is this vertical where the particles and the solution come together here. They're loaded through this vertical column, and then the magnet's in there where we grab them. And the electrowinning produces these coherent sheets that look like that. So starts with blue water, comes out with a copper sheet. It's cool stuff. And if anybody's interested in this research, I'd encourage you to come see me. I'm over in the ELC. I'd love to talk to you about it, or email me or anything. But yeah, I didn't want to bore you with an hour of data from this, so I wanted to talk about public participation, citizen engagement, community involvement, kind of all ways to talk about this same thing. And I wanted to say right off the bat that I'm not an expert. I'm not a toxicologist. I'm not a risk assessor. I'm not a political scientist, none of that. I'm really just a citizen who was interested and curious. And I'm really pretty new to the process here. I've been here about 7 years, which is fresh off the boat by local standards. And there's people in the room who have been involved for decades and decades. So, but I am a citizen, and this is my community. I consider this my community. I want to live my life out here. And as a father and a citizen, I was really interested in this, in Superfund and in the restoration process, and I wanted to get involved and engaged. So I had these questions. I wanted to know, how can citizens have agency in this process? And how can they affect change? And those two don't always necessarily coincide, but often they do. And I wanted to look at successes and challenges that other folks have faced, either locally or nationally or all around the world, see what's been successful. And I wondered what the responsibilities of the various agencies were. So that's sort of the basis of this talk, answering those questions, or at least, my limited experience in it in the last few years. And since we're in Butte, I'm going to approach it in the context of Superfund. There's lots of different ways that public participation might be important. You know, if there's a new mine being proposed, you'd want to engage the local community from day one, get buy-in from those folks. There's lots of remediation sites that aren't on the national priority list that, you know, there's remediation efforts happening there. And this is always relevant. There's always, or almost always, communities that are going to be impacted, and they should be included in this decision-making process from the very beginning. So first I looked at the regulatory agencies. You know, we have a lot of different agencies involved in Superfund, from our local government to BNRC and all these different, but primarily we have two. We have, on the federal side, we have EPA, and on the state side, we have DEQ. And they both have a real strong commitment to public participation in the process. Superfund, from its inception, part of CERCLA, had language about public participation, and they've really only reaffirmed that along the way. It's only been strengthened. DEQ is the same. These are just little snippets from their websites, but they both have this strong commitment to citizen engagement. As I looked through the rules, I found a lot about public comment periods, when those are required, responsiveness and how that's required. I didn't really see much as far as, I don't think there's any requirements for them to integrate the public will into the process. So that's, you know, this gray area that we have to work with them on that. And so first I wanted to go through ways of participating from within this system. There's a number of ways that are sort of prescribed by these agencies. And a lot of the negotiations happen you know, just between the regulatory agencies and the responsible party, at least in the case of Superfund. You know, it might be the company and the regulatory agencies or whatever it is, but especially in Butte, we have this federal gag order that prevents them from even talking about some things. So we don't get to be at the meeting a lot of the times. But there are all these other ways that EPA and DEQ try to engage with the public. We have lots of meetings and information sharing and public comments, and I'm going to go through these in a little more detail, but we have TAG and CAG groups. We have educational groups, like we have a lot of great ones here. We have the Science Mine and CFWEP, and they're going to come up again and again in this talk because they're superstars of public engagement. So, and sometimes when we don't have any resolution, we end up in litigation. We just had the Montana Supreme Court side with the residents of Opportunity that they can sue ARCO trying to get a more stringent cleanup. We had our Headwaters Coalition had a federal judge affirm that Silverbow Creek is in fact a creek. So sometimes it ends up in litigation, and that might be the sort of the last resort of this engagement. So meetings. There's a lot of meetings that happen in Superfund. I think that picture there is from one when an EPA administrator came and talked to the Restore Our Creek group. Lots of meetings where they're sharing information either about a decision or a document or some upcoming process, something, and lots of information sharing. I don't know how many have been to the Superfund section in our library here at Tech, but it is literally a wall of data and information. And it can be really impenetrable. There's no index. There's no way to search through this and find what you're looking for. It's loaded with esoteric language and numbers and acronyms that can be really hard to wade through. And so there's a lot of barriers to this information sharing. I did want to point out, though, there are other groups attempting information sharing that are doing a great job. CFWEP puts out this publication, Answers to Superfund, that really breaks it down in a way that's explainable to anybody and gives the context and the history and everything about it. So if you haven't seen that, I'd encourage checking that one out. And along with these meetings and documents, there's often an opportunity for public comments. Verbally at the meetings and in writing with a lot of these documents. I like that picture. It has a lot of our most vociferous commenters in it. And there's usually some response. You know, there's written responses in the documents, and they try to give their best response at the meetings as well. This is our record of decision on the Butte priority soils. It's quite a document, and this whole piece of it is comments and responses. So it usually ends up being a really significant part of these documents. But in my experience, it can be less than satisfying. Often it's hard to pinpoint impact from the comments. You know, not to say they don't have value. A lot of times there's clarifications that come from the firm or the agency that's putting out the document. And, you know, that speaks to a lot of these decisions have a lot of research and science that go into them. They've been well established. They have justifications. So oftentimes they're just sort of relaying the justifications for these decisions. And it can have other positive impacts. You know, the commenter, it can be therapeutic for the commenter just to get things off their chest, or to have things on the record. If sometimes you know that this decision is being made wrong, or at least in your mind, and it's nice to have that on the record. I did find some examples of impact, though, not terribly local, but just down the way in Anaconda. Public comments really drove a ROD, or record of decision, modification that established a lead action level directly in response to community actions and comments. It also, they said they didn't want a cap on a waste in place. They wanted something else, and it directly drove some decision making there. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples in the country. And there's probably examples here, but I didn't find any great ones. But public comments. So now we have these TAG and CAG groups, and these are both mechanisms administered by the EPA. It's a technical assistance grants or community advisory groups. And both of these are often described as sort of a point on a triangle, the triangle being the responsible parties, the regulatory agencies, and these groups sort of representing the community. And I don't love that metaphor because I feel like the state and the Fed are supposed to be representing the community as well. That's what they are. We're representative democracy. And oftentimes we don't have any interaction with the responsible parties. So I think that metaphor falls apart a little bit. But yeah, TAG and CAG groups. And a TAG group, they get grants. Every Superfund site community is eligible for these. And they get grants to hire technical advisors to come in and sort of decipher some of this hard to understand data and information and decision making. They can also provide comments and lots of other ways that they can interact. A CAG is a community advisory group, similar, but it's more focused on just being sort of the point of contact between the agencies and the community. And so I'm more familiar with tags. I'm going to go into a little bit more of them. We have one here. So there's been over 300 tag groups in the history of Superfund, at least up until 2015. And there's currently 55 that are active. They usually, you know, are formed when Superfund is being established, and then they go away as sort of the process evolves. I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that the tag groups we have here in our complex are some of the longest functioning tag groups in the country. You can see they're spread all over the country. This is both active and past, but and we have quite a few here in western Montana. We have Superior, Libby, Milltown. We have one in Anaconda, the Arrowhead Foundation. They're a great group. And we have CTEC here in Butte that's responsible for the Silverbow Creek and Butte Superfund, as well as the Montana Pole Plant. I'm on the board of CTEC, I should say, and I don't speak for the board at this talk. I'm just speaking for myself. But Citizens Technical Environmental Committee, that's their mission there. It's a group of volunteer citizens who work with the EPA and the regulatory agencies to make the Superfund process and the decisions understandable to everyone. And there's a lot of people in the audience who have been involved with CTEC in one way or another. And it's a great group of folks that are really engaged, but at least from my perspective, it can be a little bit frustrating, again, to pinpoint impact. A lot of times I feel like we're not necessarily fulfilling this mission. Even as a board member, I often don't understand what's happening in the decision-making process or with some of this more complex data. But it does have a lot of value. It's a great point of contact for the public. Again, we have a board meeting coming up, I think, next Tuesday.
Tuesday, 6 at the archives.
6 at the archives. And the public's always welcome. You can come and stay sort of up to date on Superfund issues. You can pose questions there. And it's a great way to engage and to get the ear of people that are experts as well as some of the regulatory agencies. They often come to the meetings. And so the board, we also do a lot of work hiring technical advisors. We have advisors right now looking over documents about surface water. We've hired technical people to be part of our health study that's associated with Superfund. And they have real impact there. They drove the, the steering of that process, and there's another health study happening now that we'll be a part of. So it does have a lot of value. And of course, all the board members are members of the community. We do lots of public outreach. This last summer, some folks had a booth at the farmers market, and that's a great way just to start conversations with folks and keep people informed and understanding what's happening. And I was really happy to find this peer-reviewed study from Dorothy Daly that really took an empirical look at the impact of these groups on Superfund and did this whole regression analysis and everything that showed that Superfund sites that have these community groups really do get better results. They have more protective remedies. And so that was encouraging. I think, just that makes sense. Just having people paying attention results in a better remedy. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience and how I got involved with CTEC. When I moved to Butte, I engaged in a way that everybody can here is you call RMAP, our Residential Metals Abatement Program, and have them come and test your residents for metals. So I did that. They came and tested my house, and they did find metals and cleaned it up. They did a great job. But something that stood out right away to me was our lead action level seemed really high in comparison to other Superfund sites I had looked at. I was just in the beginning of my environmental engineering career, and we were looking at a lot of Superfund issues, and so that stood out to me. And I tried to engage with the EPA. I called our local office and said, I see this action level. I'm wondering why it is where it is, and they explained, oh, this is an issue of bioavailability. This is how much lead, when it's accidentally ingested, just passes through rather than is absorbed. And I said, oh, that's great. I'd love to see the science and the studies behind that. Can you please send them to me? And they said, oh, well, you can trust us. We're the government. And that didn't really work for me. And so I said, no, I'd really like to see all these studies. And they said, oh, we don't really share those. And, it made me really suspicious. And it seemed to offend them, which, there's probably some justification there. They'd been working on this for decades, establishing these action levels. And here I am questioning their decisions. And so this relationship really sort of became a little bit adversarial. I kept prying, and they kept saying, go figure it out yourself. And so eventually I gave up on the EPA and heard about CTEC and started going to their meetings. And I enjoyed it a lot. There's a lot of expertise there, a lot of current issues being discussed. And I think I went to one too many meetings, and somebody nominated me to be on the board, and I've been on the board since then, 5 years or so. And it's been a great experience. Somewhat more recently, There's been changes in the local EPA, changes in personnel, and what seemed like a real renewed commitment to community involvement. And that was really welcomed by me and by the whole board, I think. And so I tried to re-engage. I went back down this line, asking for these studies, asking to see the science, asking for them to help me understand why our action levels were so high. And they were great. They went out of their way to try and help me. They got me all the studies I had been asking for 6 years, and they went through them with me. And we were able to clear up some misstatements that were in the record of decision, that were things that were confusing me from the beginning. So there'll be a few little changes to that record of decision, and they were able to, really engage with me, show me what was happening, and now instead of this sort of adversarial relationship, they have a partner in the community who can concur and say, yeah, I looked through that documentation. I think it's legitimate. Not to say that there isn't a lot we could still be doing to reduce lead exposure and be aware and increase education, but at least on that aspect of it, the bioavailability, I felt like we really made some great progress. And so I think that's a success story that sort of demonstrates the power of community involvement and in one way or the other. So now into some more sort of unconventional engagement, and a lot of this really sort of straddles the line between in the system and without. So a lot of it's funded by BNRC or SARTA or these other groups that got money through Superfund, or different ways that it is directly part of the process. So it's not necessarily all outside of the system, but it's not necessarily the methods prescribed by EPA. And activism, the first one, that's sort of a vague one. That could be anything from a letter to the editor to chaining yourself to a pipeline. So there's a wide range there, but in this case, I'm going to talk about sort of grassroots efforts to impact this decision-making process. And I'm going to go through each one of these a little more, but citizen science, hands-on, art and restoration, media, and especially relevant here on the Hill, scientists and academia. So I think this is a real success story. The removal of the Milltown Dam down close to Missoula. So in 1908, there were floods that carried metals from Butte all the way down to this dam. It's the first dam along the Clark Fork. And so there was all this sediment with metals backed up behind the dam. And I don't remember exactly when, but at some point they started seeing metals in the wells in this community here in Milltown. And so this picture is during the remediation process. This was a big reservoir originally. So once they started finding those metals, this group, Clark Fork Coalition, which I think they formed in the mid-'80s, if I remember right, in a response to Smurfit Stone, and it didn't have anything to do with this. But when this issue cropped up, they spearheaded this effort to remove the dam, to remove these sediments. And they were very successful, largely because they really engaged the public. I was a resident in Missoula at the time, and you would see this bumper sticker everywhere, remove the dam, restore the river. And there was really this groundswell of public support to do just that. And so at rallies and at meetings, they'd get hundreds and hundreds of people to show up. And of course, it wasn't just public pressure. It was a complex set of circumstances, but there was the political will and the money to do it, and all these other things sort of came together at the right time. But in the end, they were able to remove that dam and move all the sediments upstream, which I'm not sure of the wisdom of that or of cleaning up downstream first, but that's sort of beside the point. But now, and this is even several years old now, it's even looks even a lot better than this now, but there's this beautiful public space at the confluence of the Black Fork and the Clark Fork. Blackfoot and Clark Fork. And I think it's a real success story and something we can learn from. And Clark Fork Coalition's still doing great work. They're still part of Superfund. They are part of the process all the way along with Clark Fork. And locally, we have another group that's sort of following the same model, the Restore Our Creek Coalition. And this is a true coalition. It's a real a group of a lot of different folks, some economic development, some environmental justice, some just public space and kids, and all kinds of interests coming together to demand a cleanup of this small remaining section of Silverbow Creek and removing the mine waste from there. And they've been very successful, I think, for the same reason. They've really been engaging the public all the way along the way. They've had a number of events where they invited the community out. This one was a stroll where they brought folks out, did some talks about the context and the history, and then had folks walk along the path down there. And I was amazed how many folks had never been down there. And they were really grateful to see it and to have that context and that expertise explaining what was going on and to see the issues up close. And I think it's been really powerful, engaging the public. I think they've also been really successful because they brought solutions to the table. They didn't just bring complaints, which a lot of times I think that can be what it feels like with these issues, is everybody complaining about the remedy. But in this case, they held events where they did visioning and got opinions from the public on what they'd like to see down there. And then they brought in this great design team, Interval Projects, and integrated all those ideas into this plan of this Headwaters Park. And it's a really great, beautiful plan. I'd encourage you to check it out if you haven't seen it. But and they've been really successful getting the attention of the decision makers, especially the state has fully committed to at least removing the parrot tailings, if not all of it. And so I think whether or not the park materializes as it's designed, I think it's been really successful, and mostly because of citizen engagement. So some other avenues of engagement, citizen science can be really powerful. And here's CFWEP again doing awesome work, Clark Fork Watershed Education Program. They get out into the local classrooms and give kids the knowledge and the language and the science to be able to identify healthy ecosystems. And a lot of times in these circumstances, the dangers or the toxins or whatever it might be are completely invisible. So we can't see the lead in our yards or the copper in the stream. And so if you can put some science in folks' hands where they can say, oh, that's a healthy stream. And Silverbow Creek, right through lower area 1 here, is a great example where you might assume it isn't healthy because of where we are, but it is. It's thriving. There's all kinds of life happening down there. And so to put that in the citizens' hands, and especially this project where they visit with every single kid in the area, even go out of their way to go into special ed classrooms, and everybody sees it. So I think that has incredible impact, and might inspire people to pursue careers that'll have impact, but at the very least empowers citizens to understand what's going on. This other example here on the right is one of my favorites, Public Lab. They formed in response to the Deepwater Horizon accident. They're down on the Gulf, and they do a lot of citizen science, public engagement, including like balloon and kite mapping of areas and public meetings and all these different things. But they also do these low-cost instruments. This one pictured here is a spectrometer that can analyze seawater samples for hydrocarbons. So I think the last time I looked, this kit was like $25. And there's a whole online community that discusses it and refines it and makes it better and better. But folks down there can take their cheap instrument, go down to their beach and say, yeah, this beach has been impacted. There's hydrocarbons in the water here. Or no, this is clean. I feel good about swimming here, recreating here. So they're a great example. And sometimes the data from these projects can be really valuable. These are a couple examples, not local. SafeCast does a cheap instrument that I think it's sort of a do-it-yourself kit that you could put together for less than $100. And this particular version, they do some different things, but this one analyzes for radionuclides. And it was deployed in Japan around Fukushima, and they were able to crowdsource data to show where the radiation had spread. And hundreds of people had compiled data to show where it was. Similar project that I forget the name of right now, but these are even cheaper little sensors. I think they were less than $20 that analyze for air pollution. And I forget exactly what components of air pollution, but they deployed those in New York City and other big cities with pedestrians and cyclists, so that in real time they could be watching these maps and see where pollution spikes were happening and maybe areas they wanted to avoid on their commutes. So powerful technology that's pretty cheap and available to anybody. We have lots of hands-on opportunities to engage here on the Hill. We have tree planting events. Here's CFWEP again with one of their stream cleanups with kids and community members. I'm hoping Ed will maybe bring up his ideas about some other hands-on stuff that'll be happening in Butte here hopefully, but lots of opportunities for that. Watch the news and see what's going on. And art can have a really profound impact in this process too. Try to remember this quote. Artists need to be able to create on the scale that society has the capacity to destroy. And I forget who said it too, but it's a great quote that, if it's true, I think we really have our work cut out for us here. But lots of ways that we can employ art in this public engagement. Sometimes directly, like this is Metabolic Studios did this open space landscaping on an old rail yard that was being remediated. And it was actually destined to be a state park. But in the interim, in the couple of years it was going to sit idle, they turned it over to this studio to create this sort of art space to just have conversation and engage with the community. There's another practical one here where that was a brownfield in Wisconsin that this artist took and made into this sculpture park that was completely inhospitable and unused, or maybe used for the wrong things. And now it's this beautiful open space that's accessible to anybody. And CFWEP again here with their stormwater art project. You've probably seen them around uptown, but they do these wraps on utility boxes that not only beautifying the town, but also reminding us about stormwaters and drains and where that water's going. So lots of opportunities in art, sometimes directly like those, and sometimes not. Sometimes, sometimes just for the sake of the artist and the therapeutic value there, and sometimes for the public. This is another one uptown. This is Roger Pete's mural that's over on, I think it's on Hamilton. And these are Arctic grayling, and he was drawing attention to their endangered status, and it's a local endangered species. These sculptures down here are data visualization, and there's a lot of opportunity in that realm for artists in communicating data in non-traditional ways. These were weather patterns that this artist was depicting in sculpture. I really like those. And there's lots of opportunities in local media. Our local paper, the Montana Standard, does a really great job of keeping everybody up to date on Superfund issues. Both news and opinion, they've done some great editorials. And it's also another way for the public to engage is through letters to the editor and engaging in that way. And we have a great community radio station here, KBMF. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you. It's 102.5. And they have guest editorials that are relevant to Superfund, and they do great news shows, including a one called Superfund 101 that encourage you to check that out. So lots of opportunities there as well. And here at Montana Tech, we have a special opportunity with all the expertise we have here. We have all these scientists and academics that can have real impact on Superfund. Dr. Powell's Native Plants program is a really great example that funded by BNRC and support from Montana Tech, but its integration into Superfund, I think anyway, was really a product of community support and insistence really that be a part of our plan for our CAPS is using native plants. And I hope more and more citizens engage and demand it and that it becomes more integral to the project. That picture there is some researchers from U of M doing monitoring on the Clark Fork. This is part of a NSF project. We have Alicia Cox doing all kinds of really great work with microbes in ecology, and the list goes on and on here at Tech. This figure is from Bureau of Mines and Geology report. They're often directly engaged with Superfund and doing great work. And sometimes it's not necessarily scientists. We have Dr. Ray frequently engaging and doing things like his publication Contaminant Smart. So special opportunities here up at Tech to engage for everybody. So I hope I know it's just sort of a cursory overview, but I hope I've touched on a lot of different avenues for engagement and maybe inspired you as citizens or as, future or current restoration professionals. And with that, I'd love to open it up if there's questions for me or if there's comments, or especially if you have examples where you've seen public participation really impacting Superfund.